Everyone, professional photographer Ian Plant here, and in this episode of Photo Talk, I am talking with a great photographer and an all-around great human being. His name is Rick Sammon, and he is a Canon explorer of light, and he has been in this industry for almost as long as I've been alive. He's a living legend, and he has made it his life's work to educate and inspire others in the art of photography. So stay tuned. This is going to be a great interview. There's a lot to learn, and there's a lot of really interesting moments when I sit down and talk with Rick Sammon. Hey everyone, I am professional photographer Ian Plant, and my goal is to help you become the best photographer that you can be. And I have the privilege of talking today with a man who has made it his life's mission to make digital photography fun and inspiring for everyone. He is a Canon explorer of light. He is a titan in this industry. He is one of the nicest guys I've ever met. And he's not too shabby on the guitar either. Rick Sammon, welcome to Photo Talk.
Well, thank you so much, Ian, for having me. I've been called a lot of things in my life, never a titan. So thank you. But maybe when you've been around as long as I am, you get these accolades. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, you could just add Titan to your long list of really interesting nicknames. For example, I hear that you are called the Godfather of Photography, and I want to know a little bit more about that. Is it because you're ruthless?
Well, to tell you the truth, the Godfather, my mother was an Italian. She was a Caruso. And, so I'm into the whole Italian thing and, the Godfather, I love that series. But the Godfather actually did a lot of good in the neighborhoods. When people needed a favor, he would loan them money, help them out and stuff like that. And generally the Godfather was like a good person. I love my Italian Godfather. But the way I got the name is this. Do you know Trey Ratcliffe?
I know of him, yes.
Yeah, he's a young guy, very talented guy. He was great. One of the first guys to embrace HDR. He gets amazing pictures at Burning Man, does all this wonderful, wonderful educational stuff. So anyway, after his HDR book came out, I guess it was about 10 years ago, I went to interview him in New York City. So he walks in. He didn't call me the Titan, but he said, "Rick, it's a pleasure to meet you. You're like the Godfather of photography," because he had read all my books. So I must be about, if he's 40, I'm probably about 25. I'm old enough to be his father. so anyway, that name has stuck with me, and I kind of like it.
All right. Well, I am going to refer to you as Don Sammon for the rest of the interview then.
There we go.
So tell us a little bit about your background. I mean, you got started as an underwater photographer, and that seems like an interesting place to start out.
Yeah. Well, it's a long story how I got into taking underwater pictures, but for 20 years, all I did was take underwater pictures. I traveled around the world. I scuba dived under the ice in Lake Siberia. They have the only freshwater seal species there. So I was looking for that, and we found it. I was scuba diving, in Galapagos, Fiji, or off the coast of Africa, all throughout the Caribbean, the Indian Ocean. And I've written, a lot of people don't know this, I think it's 7 underwater books. And one of the books is actually called The 7 Underwater Wonders of the World. So I spent 20 years gathering pictures for all these books, and they're all educational books. I worked with the top marine scientists in the world, from National Geographic, from NOAA, from Wildlife Conservation International. We mapped coral reefs. We collected fish. We actually collected fish for the New York Aquarium from Australia and brought them back alive. So anyway, after taking tens of thousands of underwater pictures, Ian, I figure I don't need another picture of a clownfish. But what happened is this. I would go to places like Indonesia or Fiji. And so I'd be scuba diving, and I have very few topside pictures. That's how focused I was. On the marine environment and getting these pictures. But I fell in love with the people. And I would meet, especially in Southeast Asia, all these Buddhist people, Buddhist monks, just people practicing Buddhism. I'm not a Buddhist, but I believe in their philosophy that the goodness is within us. So anyway, I fell in love with the people. Then I started taking pictures of the people. So, one of my Sammonisms, I know you mentioned you might want to talk about that, is that the camera looks both ways. In picturing the subject, we're also picturing a part of ourselves, meaning the mood, the feeling, the expression, the body language, the energy that we're projecting is reflected in our subjects. So I fell in love with the subjects. And I really believe, like with your landscape photography, I know by looking at your pictures, you love the landscapes. I know you love the landscape photography, but you love the landscapes, which that gives you that affinity to get these amazing pictures, that you get. So I think as photographers, if we realize that the camera looks both ways, and if we photograph what we love, we'll get a much higher percentage of keepers.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. And I do want to...
I know. I know. I was going all over the place, but I usually do. I'm totally hyper.
That's okay. That's okay. We will talk about the Sammonisms a little bit later. I want to drill down deeper into that. But first, I've got a question for you. All that time you spent underwater, did it change the way that you see the world? Did it change the way that you approach photography? I know I've done a very little amount of underwater photography, and it's a completely different beast from anything that I've done on the land. Do you think that that's had any influence on your work? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? If it has had an influence on your work, let's talk about that a bit.
It definitely has, because back then I was shooting slide film. So we have rolls of 36 exposure film. And on a dive, if you got one good picture, every National Geographic underwater photographer will tell you the same thing. And I'm not a National Geographic underwater photographer, by the way, but if we got one good picture, a roll, we were happy, because there's so many variables. You're moving, the fish are moving, there's plankton in the water. You had to set up your strobes in a certain way so you wouldn't get what's called backscatter. The light illuminating off the phytoplankton and the zooplankton, particles in the water, that would mess up your pictures. And we could take it out digitally. We could, today we could take out or we could scan our slides and do it too and change the color. But, water's 800 times more dense than air. So you had to be close. So my favorite lens for like regular reef photography and scuba and pictures of scuba divers is like a 15 millimeter lens. And then, of course, the macro lens was cool too. But anyway, it really showed me that you have to focus. And even today, I have what I call my one picture promise that you may have heard of. And I started to develop it back then. And what my one picture promise is this, that if you're in a situation, if you say to yourself, and I think you probably do this, correct me if I'm wrong or chime in, that if you're in a situation, if you say to yourself, if I could only take one picture, meaning, what lens, if it's a zoom lens, what focal length, what aperture, what shutter speed, what focus, what composition, what can I do afterward? If you say to yourself, if I could only take one picture, what would that one picture be? I promise you, and I do promise you, that you get a higher percentage of keepers and much more creative pictures. Ansel Adams said the most important camera accessory is the 12 inches behind the camera, right? Meaning your brain.
Yeah.
Right? So that to answer your question, finally getting to answer your question, I think back then it showed me the importance of focusing, and that how you really have to be so focused. You have to have like your radar on all the time. You have to have what a fighter pilot calls situational awareness. When a fighter pilot's going around in a plane, upside down at Mark whatever, he or she has to be aware of everything that's going on around. And as photographers, I see this in your work. You're aware of the light. You're aware of the depth of field. You're aware of the weather. You just wrote something recently on how weather is so helps to make a good outdoor photograph. So being aware, I think that really helped me, and it was just so much fun. Plus, it's like meditating. It's like meditating when you're floating underwater. It's because you're looking at your air. You can't think about anything else. It's really an exercise in focus. The other thing it taught me is that you always have to have a backup, because everything underwater is going to flood. A camera, a strobe, a sync cord. No, it does. It's true.
Yeah. Well, I like the way you frame that, the one picture promise. And I think it sounds to me like what you're saying in part is that, being underwater, and certainly you've extended this into your later career, that really you're going for that one great photo. And I think a lot of photographers get into the habit of thinking that they're going to go to a location and make lots and lots of good photos. And for folks like you and me who really have taken a deep dive, pardon the pun, into this passion of photography, we know that all the good photos you take aren't really that important. You're really trying to get that one great photo. And all of the other photography you're doing is just leading up to that great moment. You're out there, you're waiting, you're working with the subject, you're constantly refining what you're doing. And it's just an iterative process, one shot leading to the next. And if you have to take 1,000 photos to get that one great photo and you throw away those other 1,000 photos, it's all worth it.
It's definitely worth it. It's, people on my workshops, people say sometimes they say, hey, Rick, how come you're not shooting? I say, well, there's nothing to shoot that, I'm not going to take just a boring snapshot. I'm going to I'm going to, wait for the light or wait for the weather to change or whatever. So yeah, that one picture promise seems to actually, I know it works. Because once I start telling people about this and sharing that philosophy, they do come back with a higher percentage of keepers.
Well, so let's talk a bit about motivation and inspiration. You just mentioned that you might be out there and someone says, why aren't you shooting? And you say, well, the conditions aren't really good. I mean, it sounds to me like at that moment, you're not really inspired what's being offered to you. And so let me ask you generally, what does inspire you? What does get you excited and get you to take the camera out of the bag and start taking pictures?
Well, actually, I'm wearing a Batman t-shirt right now, which I think we're going to talk about. But I have another t-shirt. And to answer your question, on the t-shirt, it says, it depends. And so, no, really, any question, and I was talking to my doctor. I went to the heart doctor the other day just for a checkup, and I had my It Depends shirt on, and he said, that's a cool shirt. I said, well, you probably, could use a t-shirt like this. If someone goes to him and says, how long am I going to live? It depends, right? It depends. So what motivates me? Sometimes it's the subject. And getting back to that one picture promise, so what motivates me, like, for example, my wife and I were in Sri Lanka, which is a beautiful place. And we're walking around this temple where statues of Buddha are carved in the side of this mountain. And there's this one girl. She was about 8 or 9 years old, walking around with her mother. And she was gorgeous, had this beautiful scarf on. And I said, with my one picture promise, not only am I going to try to get a good exposure, she's the one person out of 100 or 200 people there that I want to photograph. So they're the subject inspiring me. But sometimes, I look at your pictures, I look at our friend Erin Babnick's pictures, and the light, right? The light, of course, inspires us. So sometimes it's the subject, sometimes it's the light, sometimes it's the emotion, sometimes it's just, I want to capture like a fun moment. So it really does depend.
So what about motivation? You've been in this business for a long time. I've been in this business long enough to know that sometimes you can get in a creative rut and sometimes you might have a lack of motivation and inspiration. How do you keep things fresh? How do you just keep motivated and inspired after all this time to go out and make photos?
I think you have to be passionate about whatever you do. I think we could say the same thing about, a chef who's been cooking. How do you wake up every day, make a new dish? I think, you have to love what you do. And you could ask the same question. You could see my guitars in the back. People say, how do you keep getting, I went to Berklee College of Music, by the way, and majored in arranging and composition. And, back then, we got motivated by listening to, Chick Corea, I love jazz the best, all the great jazz artists. So by, listening to these musicians, you could get motivated, inspired. By looking at the work of other photographers, I get motivated and inspired. So it's all, but I also think it might be chemical. Meaning that there's something, I wake up every day, I can't wait to get out of bed and do something. Whether it's take a picture or cut the lawn, believe it or not, I really enjoy. No, I'm not kidding. I enjoy cutting the lawn and trimming the hedges. So I just love life. And there's an expression. If I could find this expression. So this is a quote, then I'll tell you who it's by. So the person says, I say in speeches that a plausible mission of artists is to make people appreciate being alive. And that's it. They appreciate being alive at least a little bit. Then the guy says, then I'm asked, who do you know who pulled this off? And then he says, the Beatles did it. And the Beatles, I listen to Beatles songs, a lot of Beatles songs. I do feel like, I'm so happy to be alive. And anyway, the person who said that is the author Kurt Vonnegut, one of my all-time favorite authors. All-time favorite authors. Yeah, I have that in a slideshow. I'm sorry it took so long to find it. But anyway, I'm so happy, especially, and I'm finding this, maybe because I'm older, maybe that I survived, the coronavirus. People say to me, they say, Rick, you're the most grateful person I know. Now, I may not be the most grateful person they know, but I really feel grateful to be alive. And that's, I think being grateful and being appreciative and being a positive person motivates you in everything. And, I feel if you're good at, if you're motivated in one area, you're probably motivated in other areas too. But, self-motivation, one of the reasons why I wrote a phototherapy, motivation and wisdom is to try to motivate people because it's not easy. It's not easy for a lot of people to stay motivated, especially, working at home. You've worked at home for a long time, right? You do your workshops out of your house, you do your processing at home. My wife and I have done this for 35 years. So the pandemic hasn't changed anything as far as that goes.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about your phototherapy book and your phototherapy Facebook group.
Well, yeah, again, I started this during the pandemic because I thought people might need some phototherapy. And then, so the book, actually what's interesting, as you know, because you contributed to PhotoQuest, the follow-up to that, and thank you again very much for that.
My pleasure.
These actually are my, out of my 42 books, 42 is coming out soon, my most popular books. And as you know, they don't have any pictures in them. And the reason I didn't put pictures in them is I didn't want people to be distracted by a pretty scene, right? A beautiful landscape, a nice underwater picture, a picture of a Buddhist monk. I wanted people to envision their own pictures. So I was taking a chance, doing a book and then a follow-up book with no pictures in them, but it seemed to work. But I'm not the first person to do this. There's a book called The Artist's Way that you may have read by Julia Cameron, I think that's her name. Anyway, the book is called The Artist's Way. It doesn't have any pictures in them. So anyway, at this point in my life, you and I were talking the other day about helping people. And I really feel we're all in this together. And I do feel that it's our job, to use that expression, pay it forward, or to give back and do something. And there's a tremendous feeling of satisfaction, I can tell you, in helping people.
All right. Well, I'll make sure to include some links to your phototherapy and PhotoQuest books in the description below this video, and definitely recommend people check it out. So I'm dying to ask you now. You mentioned the Batman shirt, so I got to know, what's up with the Batman shirt?
Okay, well, let me ask you a question, my friend.
Okay. And the answer is, yes, I'm Batman.
Yeah, well, in a way, all kidding aside, you have some qualities of Batman.
Oh!
And I'll tell you why. But let me ask you before, think of all the superheroes you know. Mm-hmm. Don't say anything yet. All the superheroes you know. Who's the superhero who has the greatest superpowers, the all-time greatest superpowers?
That's a good question.
Well,
I feel like this is a trick question.
It's not. He could fly. He has X-ray vision. Bullets bounce off him. He's invulnerable.
Superman or Thor.
Okay, Thor's a runner-up, but it's Superman. So my point is this, and the reason I have the Batman shirt on is to remind me to talk about this, because I think it's one of the most important things that we as photographers, artists, people can think about. Superman has all these great powers, right?
Right.
Batman has no superpowers. Batman has no superpowers. What makes him a superhero? He uses his brain, and he uses his courage, and he uses the belief in himself. And this makes him a superpower. So I'm talking to my son, he's just graduating. He's getting his PhD in finance from Northwestern. Give him a little plug here. I said to him, Marco, we named him Marco because we Used to travel all over the world with him. Now he's too focused on his studies. I said, Marco, you're good at this. You're good at this. So the discussion came up that we have a superpower that makes us good at different things. And like I said before, if you're good at one thing, you're usually good at a lot of things. So think about Santana. Do you like Santana?
Oh, absolutely.
One of my favorite guitar players, my favorite rock in Latin. Anyway, I watched the Santana masterclass, and for like 2 hours, 2.5 hours, never once did he mention the equivalent of an f-stop, a shutter speed, a lens, or whatever. Nothing technical. He talked about that to be a good guitar player, you have to fall in love with the guitar. You have to make love to the guitar. You have to be one with the guitar. And believe it or not, he could talk about this for 2 hours. And he's a very spiritual person. He hears the music. He has a situational awareness. So if you ask Carlos Santana, which I hope I get to ask him someday, what's your superpower? He's not going to say, well, I could play really fast, or I could hold a note longer, which he can, I think, longer than anyone. I was listening to him the other day. He holds these notes. He gets this tremendous feeling. So if we as photographers ask ourselves, what's a superpower that makes us good at photography or processing or whatever, or if we're a chef, if chefs are listening or artists are listening, what makes us good? I think of that help us get motivated and stay motivated and actually produce better work. So I'm trying to think about, while I was putting on my Batman shirt today, I was thinking, what are Ian's superpowers? And I'm not, even though I wrote the book, Phototherapy, I'm not a licensed phototherapist, if there is such a thing. But I was thinking, what are your superpowers? And I think you were trained as a lawyer.
Yep.
So lawyers have to be able to, as you know, because my son's girlfriend's a lawyer, they have to be able to study really and focus. They have to be able to retain stuff. They have to look, correct me if I'm wrong, you have to look at things from both sides, right? Or more than two sides, right?
Absolutely.
If someone says, so you're looking at things and you're analyzing all this stuff. So I think you're trained, again, you may say I have all these other, Ian, have all these other superpowers, but I think you're training as a lawyer, that your ability to focus, that your ability to see things from both sides, the ability to appreciate what's going on, your situational awareness, because I'm sure in law school you had to practice being, given being, arguing a case or whatever. So I think that's one of your superpowers. I also think you love life and you're a happy person inside, because I heard you laugh a couple of times. I saw you laugh a couple of times on this. So, but seriously, Batman has no superpowers and he's a superhero. So I would like your viewers to think about what is my superpower and how does that make me good at what I do? Because then I think you might say, hey, I could do other things. Like say, maybe one of your viewers says, oh, I never play guitar, I never play piano. I have the superpower that may let me do this. So I think the superpower idea, again, generated from a conversation I had with my son, I think it's a very, very interesting concept. And it's not an original concept. You could do a search, superpowers, and you'll find lots of different things.
Well, I think that's really fascinating. And I appreciate you saying that I have a superpower. And you're probably right. That's a pretty good analysis of the one thing that I do best is probably analyze things, maybe overanalyze things.
You're also a good interviewer.
Well, thank you.
I for your listeners, when Ian sent me the prep document for this, I said that he should have a show on the Travel Channel. not only because he's a young, talented, good-looking guy and has these amazing pictures. You're so organized, right? You sent me this list of questions, which I actually didn't read because I don't like to be prepared. No, really. Otherwise, okay, I have to answer this, but I skim through them. So thank you for sending that.
No problem. And I want to turn this phototherapy psychology around on you, and I'm going to talk about your superpower, Rick. If I had to identify just one of your superpowers, and I know you have many, I think the one that immediately springs to mind is your empathy. it sounds like you're someone who genuinely does like working with and helping people. And I see your empathy come through in your photography. And I'm thinking of your travel photography in particular. You're working with people. Often there's a cultural or a language barrier, yet somehow you still manage to find a connection with the subjects that you're photographing. And I think that's got a lot to do with empathy. So tell me about that. When you're working with people around the world, you can't really communicate with them. How do you get them to be at ease and to be a part of the photography experience and to tell their story through you to the viewers?
Well, Ian, that is a great question. And, I think I do have a lot of empathy. My father would say that he was a softie. My son says I'm sentimental. And, I really do love people. I tell people that my specialty is not specializing because I did the underwater, I do the landscape, the portraits in my studio here and all this stuff. But I really love meeting people and learning from people and learning about their cultures and learning what's important to them. Like, I have pictures of these people in the Brazilian rainforest, Tariano Indians, and they paint their faces like amazingly, these decorations and all these patterns and stuff like that. So I asked our guide to ask the woman that I was photographing, I said, can you ask her why they paint their faces? And she responded that they paint their faces so that when they go into the rainforest, the spirits of the rainforest help them with the hunt and they protect them. So, for us, maybe your iPhone's important to check an instant message, right? Or a text is important. For these people, surviving is important. And I've been all over the world, and surviving a day to the next day is important. So anyway, I do love photographing the people, but the way I break the ice most of the time, and I did this in Brazil too, is I carry magic tricks with me. There's a store in New York City called Tannen's Magic, and they sell every trick you've seen on TV, including like they have the plans for like how to make the space shuttle disappear. I mean, this is what Tannen's Magic is all about. Every trick you've seen on all David Blaine's tricks, where he throws a deck of cards at a window and the card you picked is on the other side of the window. So I do these magic tricks, and so I'm giving something before I take something. And I want the people to, I was going to say but I need the people to at least accept me into their lives. And then I break the magician's code, which I think is okay if you're in Brazil or Myanmar or wherever, Myanmar, which is in terrible shape right now. I show the magic trick. So I'm giving something, and that breaks the ice. And I interact with the people. And getting back to that expression that the camera looks both ways, people know if you respect them or not. There's a sixth sense. So I really try to show the people that I respect them.
Well, so now I really want to see one of your magic tricks. But I'm glad that you brought up the camera looks both ways. That's one of your salmonisms. And so I want to talk a little bit more about salmonisms. I mean, I can guess, but what exactly is a salmonism?
Well, they're not all original quotes, but when I give a workshop, and this happened I was in Death Valley giving a workshop. And so all the students are lined up in front of me. I always stand behind the students. Anyone who's watching, who's coming to my workshops know that I'm standing behind the students. But I'm giving tips. So I give a tip like if they're shooting a model, like in Death Valley against the sunrise, I'll say like backlight, shoot tight. In other words, for a good exposure without making a lot of exposure compensation, you want to shoot tight. Or if they're taking a picture of the model, with the sand dunes, I'll say, negative space is nice, but the name of the game is to fill the frame. The name of the game is to fill the frame. It's a salmonism. So in other words, if you want an image with impact, fill the frame. Although there's something, of course, to be said for negative space. One of my favorites is use your camera like a spaceship. In other words, I'm sure you've seen this on your workshops. People come the first day, everyone sets up their camera on eye level and they start shooting. Well, if you use your camera like a spaceship, and I know I should probably update it to like a drone, but, right? If you move it, if you get low to the ground, like I see in some of your pictures, you have a feeling of being there. Because you have that foreground element. Or if you're photographing a model, tilted to the left or the right, what's called disequilibrium or the Dutch effect. So using your camera like spaceship. So anyway, in Death Valley, I'm sharing all these tips. I'm sure. So people were writing them down. My friend Mike Ince and Laura, my friends Mike Ince and Laurie Apple presented me at the end of the workshop with a list of all these things that they called Sammonisms. so they became known as Sammonisms. And now I have a Kelby 1 class on Sammonism. So I have almost 30 classes on Kelby 1. And it's they're a ton of fun to do, and you get a lot of good feedback from the members there. They have a really good forum. So anyway, that's how the Sammonisms came into being.
I have a feeling that this is going to be a thing that might stick around with us for a while. I'm imagining 2,000 years from now, a bunch of monks of the Church of Sammon, walking through the courtyard of their abbey, chanting their Sammonisms.
With Batman shirts on.
Right. Use your camera like a spaceship.
Yeah, it'll be like a drone thing, it'll be like a drone, like a chant, like a Gregorian chant.
Exactly.
But all kidding aside, I came up with these because who wants to read like 87 pages on all this, stuff? Like daylight, fill, and flash isn't that hard, right? So what I try to do as a photo educator is I try to make it as simple as possible. And the subtitle for my Kelby 1 class, Sammonism, is called Speed Learning Advice for Making Awesome Photographs. So I getting back to me being hyper, I don't want to spend a long time learning. I figure people don't want to spend a long time learning.
Well, let's switch gears here. A question I like to ask during these interviews is for the interviewee to tell me the scariest or most embarrassing or craziest things that have ever happened to them while they were out making photographs. And I've got a feeling that you've got some interesting stories. So tell us, anything really interesting happened to you in the past 35 years?
Yes, more than a few. One that comes to mind, and I have a new book coming out. It's called Photo Pursuit. It's the third in my trilogy. I have, phototherapy, then Photo Quest, and this is called Photo Pursuit. And actually, this one does have pictures in there. One picture for each story, and the subtitle is Stories Behind the Photograph. So I have an underwater photograph. So here's the story. Back in the 80s, I'm scuba diving in Venezuela on the lost city of Nueva Cadiz, which is the first Spanish settlement in South America. And I'm working with these archaeologists. Again, I always had a purpose for diving, just like, taking, pretty pictures. It was working with either marine scientists or marine archaeologists. So we're diving and we're working really hard documenting the ruins, the underwater ruins and the topside ruins of Nueva Cadiz. So after we're done the project, I said, okay, we're going to do some fun dives. So I asked the organizers of the trip, hey, where can we go diving? They said, oh, there's a barge not too far away. It sank about, 20 years ago. It's covered with corals and fishes. It's a great day dive, but the night dives are incredible because you say you did a little diving at night. Speaking of focus, your focus is just in the beam of your headlamp, right? Or the beams the flashlights that are on your strobes. So we do a day dive, we going around, take some nice pictures. So I said, okay, we're gonna do a night dive. So it's nighttime, it's jet blackout. So I'm on the back of the boat and two of my friends are on the back of the boat. We jump in the water and we start descending down to the top of the barge, which was covered again with all these corals and the fishes. So we're going down, we have our lights, and again, we can only see what's in the beam of our lights. So we go down and then we hit the top of the barge. And we're photographing, and we're going left and right, but we're staying close together. So I'm looking at my watch and my dive gauge, and I say, okay, it's time to go up. So I point my light up. Well, it turns out, Ian and your listeners, that we were not on the top of the barge. We had gone through one of the holes on the top of the barge, and we're inside the barge, and we're covered by the ceiling. And we have no idea where to go.
Wow,
right?
That must have freaked you out.
I'm hyperventilating. My air's going down like this. So I grabbed the hands of my, because I have my camera in one hand. I grabbed the hand of one of my friend divers, Dale, my other friend Barbara. We just we just said we don't know what we're going to do. So we're just swimming around, not too fast because we had sense enough not to stir up what was on the silt, which would make us blind underwater. You couldn't see, not blind, but you just couldn't see anything. Miraculously, we're just going around, we're shining our flashlights up, and we see open water, and we got out. So I don't know how the heck we got out of there because there was a big area underneath this giant barge. But that's the closest I've come to dying by accident.
Wow. You tell me this story and it just kind of reaffirms my belief that no one should ever go under the water for any reason, anytime.
I skydived. I skydived off skydived in Namibia, jumped out of a plane where they have, the giant sand dunes.
Oh, wow.
But I almost died another time. I almost died another time. If you want to hear another story?
Yeah, absolutely. So just before you dive into that other story, the reason I mentioned that about going underwater is one of the I almost died stories that I have is I almost died once while I was snorkeling in Belize, and it was just stupid. And so I'm terrified of doing any serious diving as a result. So I'm not trying to make this a competition. I just wanted to let you know that I've got a similar but much less cool story about underwater demise. But let's go on to your next almost died story.
Well, I think more people die actually snorkeling than from scuba diving.
Oh, yeah?
Because they panic.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want to share your story?
No, not at all. I don't want to have flashbacks. So let's go to your story.
Okay, the other one. People think, Antarctica. Have you been?
No, I have not.
Okay. Well, so I've been a few times. So one time I was there. People think, oh, it's great being like, travel photographer, going to Antarctica, seeing the blue ice, all the animals. Well, I was on a special trip to photograph emperor penguins, which look like king penguins, but they're a little larger. Anyways, to Snow Hill Island. So most trips to Antarctica, like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever. This was only a 6-day trip from Ushuaia, which is the southernmost city on the planet. 6 days from Ushuaia to Snow Hill Island and back. Okay, only a 6-day trip because it's a special trip that was organized by a special group. So we leave Ushuaia the first day. It's beautiful. The weather's great. The enthusiasm on the boat is just unbelievable. People are so excited. They save their whole lives, to see these emperor penguins, which are really, really cool. So anyway, the first day out, it's great. The second day, the weather starts to get bad, and people said, oh, we may not get great pictures. I said, well, listen, we're still going to have like a great time and see them, even if it's not like a blue sky or whatever. So the third day, it starts to snow, and it got worse. So the reason I mentioned the snow is because we were going to go from the ship, a Russian icebreaker, on 2 Russian-made helicopters, which were on the ship, over to Snow Hill Island. So the third day, it started to snow, but it got worse. And half the ship got the Norwalk virus. And I don't know if you know about this, but if there's any doctors, medical people who are listening, they know. This is before the coronavirus. I thought it was the worst virus known to man. It's like a pitchfork's in your stomach, and I'm going to stop there.
Wow.
But I always travel with the satellite phone with me, and I'm actually on the phone with my wife, telling her where the will is, saying goodbye. I thought I was going to die in Antarctica. Fortunately, I got better in 2 days, but I've never been so sick. So actually, the end of that story is the 6-day trip. I got one picture. I was able to get off the ship one day, and I was able to get one picture.
Well, let me ask you this. Was that one picture worth all of that pain and suffering?
Yes, and I talk about that in Photo Pursuit because it's the picture of emperor penguins that people die for. It's the mommy and the daddy close together with the chick right between them looking up, isolated, so there's no other penguins around. So it actually was worth the trip.
Well, fantastic. I'm glad that it was worth all of that suffering. And I think we have a new Sammonism from this one, that the best photos will happen after you suffer the most. I know A lot of people think that that's where the where great art comes from, is from suffering.
Well, yes. As a musician, some people say you can't play the blues unless you live the blues, unless you feel the blues. So,
Well,
so
Rick,
I agree with you.
fantastic. Well, Rick, this has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. I had a great time. I know everyone who listens is going to love everything that you've got to say. And remember, listeners, Rick Sammon said it here first. Ian Plant is Batman. Rick, thank you so much for coming on to Photo Talk. I hope you can come back again sometime.
Thank you, my friend. You did an excellent job, a most excellent job.
Thank you. So did you. We'll talk later. Bye-bye.